There is a moment, and perhaps you know it well. Perhaps you have lived it without quite having the words for it. When you're lying on your back in the dark and the sky above you opens so wide, so terrifyingly wide, that something cold moves through your chest and you realize, with a clarity that is almost painful, that you do not know where you are. Not in the way you know your address or your city or your country. You do not know where you're in any sense that truly matters. You're a small, warm-breathing thing on a rock, spinning at roughly 1,000 miles per hour around a star that does not know your name, in a galaxy that contains something like 200 billion other stars, in a universe that holds something like 2 trillion other galaxies, and every single one of those galaxies is moving away from you right now as you read this, as you breathe, as your heart does its quiet, faithful work. The universe is not staying, it is leaving, and it has been leaving since before there was anyone here to notice that feeling. That particular vertigo, that cold hand on the sternum, Feynman knew it. He chased it his whole life. He said, more than once, in more than one room full of people who expected him to be merely brilliant, that the most beautiful thing a human being can do is to look at something real and feel genuinely, uncomfortably, gloriously loose, because being lost means you're standing at the edge of something you have not yet understood, and the edge, he always said, is where the interesting things live. So here is the question that lives at that edge, the one that has been asked in every language that has ever existed, the one that has started wars and ended friendships and kept philosophers awake until the birds started singing, does God exist? And before you settle into whatever answer you already carry, whatever answer was handed to you by your family or your culture or your fear or your comfort, Feynman would ask you, very gently but with that unmistakable glint in his eye, to wait, to hold that answer loosely for a moment. Because the question, when you look at it from the inside of a cosmos as strange as this one, turns out to be far more interesting and far more dangerous and far more beautiful than the word itself suggests. Pues let us begin there, with the word, with the idea, with the immensity of what is actually being asked. Mira, when most people ask whether God exists, they are really asking several different questions at once, and they do not always know it. They are asking whether there is a mind behind the universe. They are asking whether the universe cares about them specifically. They are asking whether there is a purpose woven into the fabric of things, some intention, some direction, some plan. And they are asking, underneath all of that, whether they matter, whether any of this matters, whether the cold, expanding, indifferent cosmos that science describes is the whole story, or whether there is something else, something warmer, something that sees them. Those are not the same question. And Feynman, who was one of the most precise thinkers who ever lived, who spent decades insisting that the first duty of any honest person is to be precise, would want you to notice that. He would want you to sit with the discomfort of having several questions tangled together in one small word. Because that discomfort is not a problem to be solved quickly. It is the beginning of actual thinking. And I want to tell you something before we go any further, because what is coming in the next several minutes is going to ask something of you. It is going to ask you to hold contradictions. It is going to ask you to be comfortable with uncertainty in a way that our culture does not always reward. And I want to promise you that if you stay, if you follow this all the way through, you will come out the other side with something genuinely useful. Not a definitive answer, because Feynman would have laughed at anyone who promised you that. But a way of thinking, a set of lenses, a method for standing at the edge of the biggest question in human history and feeling not crushed by it, but lit up by it. I will come back to the specific tools he used, the exact moves he made when confronted with the unknowable, and they are going to change the way you think about this. But first, let me take you somewhere. Imagine a Tuesday evening, nothing special. You're somewhere quiet, maybe a porch, maybe a window, maybe just a patch of grass behind a house in a suburb where the streetlights have not quite drowned out the sky. And you look up, the way humans have looked up for 100,000 years, and you see the stars, not all of them. Light pollution takes most of them, but enough to feel something. And what you feel, if you're honest, is not comfort, or not only comfort. There is something else in it, something that sits just below the warmth, something that makes the warmth necessary, something that the warmth is a response to. It is the vastness, it is the silence, it is the fact that those points of light are not decorations. They are suns, ancient, enormous, burning things. Most of them larger than our own sun, many of them orbited by worlds we will never visit. some of them already dead. Their light still traveling toward your eyes from a source that no longer exists. You are in a very literal and non-metaphorical sense looking at the past. The light from the nearest star beyond our sun, Proxima Centauri, takes 4.2 years to reach your eyes. The light from the Andromeda Galaxy, which you can sometimes see with the naked eye as a faint smear in the right conditions, left its source 2.5 million years ago. When that light began its journey, Homo sapiens did not exist. There were hominids, certainly, but not us. Not yet. And that light has been traveling through the absolute cold of space, through nothing, through silence, through the long dark, and it arrives at your retina on a Tuesday evening while you're thinking about whether you remember to send that email. Bueno, Feynman loved this. He loved it the way some people love music, with his whole body. He used to say that scientific knowledge adds to the excitement and mystery and awe of a flower. He was not being poetic for the sake of it. He was being precise, because when you know what a star actually is, when you know the nuclear furnace at its core, the pressure, the temperature, the specific chain of reactions that fuses hydrogen into helium and releases the energy that eventually becomes the light that crosses 2.5 million years to warm your face on a Tuesday evening, the experience of looking up is not diminished. It is amplified. It becomes something almost unbearable in its beauty. And here is where the question of God walks in through the back door, quietly without announcing itself. Because when you truly feel the scale of what you're looking at, when you let it land, not as an abstract number, but as a lived sensation in your body, something in you reaches for a word. Something in you wants there to be a mind behind it, a reason, an author. Because the alternative, that all of this emerged from nothing through processes that had no intention, no goal, no awareness of you or anyone. The alternative is dizzying in a way that most of us, most of the time, would rather not feel. And this is where I need you to pay very close attention. Because Feynman would say that this feeling, this reaching, this desire for an author is rail data. It tells you something true about human beings, but it does not tell you anything reliable about the universe. Messigas? Let me say that again because it matters. The fact that you want something to be true is not evidence that it is true. The fact that a universe with a designer feels more comfortable than a universe without one is not a measurement of the universe. It is a measurement of you, of your nervous system, of the particular kind of creature you are, a social mammal who evolved in small groups where intentions and agents and causes were everywhere. We're assuming that a rustle in the bushes was caused by something that wanted to hurt you was a survival advantage. Your brain is exquisitely, magnificently tuned to find minds behind events. And that tuning, which kept your ancestors alive, can also, when pointed at the cosmos, produce a very convincing but potentially inaccurate signal. This is not an insult. This is not Feynman telling you that you are foolish for wanting God to exist. He was far too careful and far too kind for that. What he is pointing at is the difference between what we feel and what we can verify. And he spent his entire career insisting that this difference is not a small technical detail. It is the whole game. Now, here is where it gets genuinely strange, and I promised you strange, so stay with me. Feynman did not call himself an atheist. He also did not call himself a believer. He called himself agnostic, but even that word felt too neat for him. What he actually said, in various forms across many years, was something more like this: I do not know. And I think that not knowing is the most honest position available to anyone who has actually looked at the evidence. He said that the universe is not obligated to be comprehensible to us. That nature does not care whether its laws match our intuition. That the history of physics is, in large part, a history of discovering that the universe is far stranger than anyone expected, stranger than anyone could have invented, stranger than any story told by any religion or any philosophy, and that this strangeness is not a sign of a hidden simplicity behind the scenes. It is the thing itself. Think about quantum mechanics. And I know quantum mechanics is the thing people invoke when they want to sound deep at dinner parties, but bear with me because the actual facts of quantum mechanics are so bizarre that no metaphor does them justice, and Feynman knew this better than almost anyone because he helped build the theory. An electron does not have a definite position until you measure it. It exists in a superposition of possible positions, a smear of probability, and the act of measurement collapses that smear into a single outcome. Before measurement, the electron is not somewhere that you simply do not know about. It is genuinely ontologically in multiple places at once. This is not a limitation of our instruments. It is a feature of reality. Fíjate bien. Feynman used to say that anyone who claims to understand quantum mechanics has not understood quantum mechanics. He was not being falsely modest. He was being precise. The mathematics works. The predictions are accurate to a degree that has no parallel in the history of human knowledge. You are using quantum mechanics right now in the device that is showing you this, in the transistors that make it function. And yet no one, including the people who built the theory, can tell you what it means, what is actually happening, what reality is doing when no one is looking. Now, does that sound like a universe that was designed to be understood? Does that sound like the creation of a being who wanted its creatures to know it through reason? Or does it sound like something else, something wilder, something that preceded intention, something that does not map onto any category we have available, including the category of God as most people imagine it? This is the question Feynman sat with, not comfortably, not with resolution, but with what he called, and this is a direct translation of his spirit, if not always his exact words, a kind of thrilled uncertainty. He was not miserable about not knowing. He was energized by it. He thought that people who claimed certainty about the existence or non-existence of God were both making the same mistake. The mistake of thinking the question was simpler than it is. And I want to tell you about a moment, a real one that happened in a context I know well from studying his work and his lectures. There was a conversation, one of many he had over the years with people who wanted him to either confirm or deny the existence of God. And a student came to him, a young man who had grown up religious and was now studying physics and felt, as many young scientists feel, that he had to choose. That the universe described by physics and the universe described by his faith were two different universes, and he could only live in one. And Feynman looked at him for a moment and then he said, "You have set up a false choice. The universe does not care about your categories." The student pressed him. He said, "But do you believe in God?" And Feynman said something like this, not in quotation marks, because the exact words shifted across versions, but the substance was, "I believe in mystery. I believe that we do not know what we are. I believe that the atoms in your body were once inside stars. I believe that the fact that you can ask that question is the most remarkable thing in the known universe. Whether there is a God behind all of that, I genuinely do not know. And I think that saying I do not know and meaning it is the most religious thing I have ever done." Bueno, let that sit for a moment, because in a moment I'm going to take you into the specific ways Feynman thought about the relationship between science and the divine, the exact intellectual moves he made, and some of them are going to surprise you. But first, let me tell you why this matters beyond philosophy. Let me tell you why the answer to this question, or rather the method by which you approach the question, has consequences that are not abstract at all. We are living in a moment where the tools of science have given us a picture of the cosmos that is, by any measure, the most accurate picture any civilization has ever had. We know the age of the universe, approximately 13.8 billion years. We know the size of the observable universe, approximately 93 billion light years in diameter. And that is only the observable part, the part whose light has had time to reach us. We know that the universe is composed mostly of things we cannot see, dark matter and dark energy, which together make up roughly 95% of everything that exists and about which we know almost nothing. We know that life arose on this planet roughly 3.8 billion years ago from chemistry, from the interaction of molecules in conditions that, by the standards of the universe, are extraordinarily rare. And we know with a certainty that should feel alarming that we are alone in our neighborhood. The nearest star is 4.2 light years away. The nearest planet that might support life as we know it is even farther. The silence of the cosmos, the fact that in 70 years of listening we have heard nothing that unambiguously says hello from another intelligence, is either the most terrifying or the most awe-inspiring fact in the history of human knowledge, and possibly both at once. Now, here is what Feynman would say about the relationship between all of that and the question of God. He would say that the universe, as described by science, is not less wondrous than the universe described by religion. It is more wondrous. It is more strange. It is more surprising. The God of most religious traditions is a being with intentions, with preferences, with a plan, a being that resembles in its basic structure a very powerful person. And Feynman would say that the universe we have actually found does not resemble the creation of a very powerful person. It resembles something for which we do not have a category, something that generated from a state of almost unimaginable simplicity. 13.8 billion years ago, from a point of infinite density and temperature, a process that eventually produced, through the expansion of space, through the formation of matter, through the collapse of gas clouds into stars, through the nuclear fusion inside those stars that created every element heavier than hydrogen, through the death of those stars in supernovae that scattered those elements across space, through the coalescence of those elements into new solar systems, through chemistry, through geology, through biology, through evolution, through nervous systems, through consciousness, through language, through mathematics, through physics, a creature that can sit on a porch on a Tuesday evening and ask whether any of it was intended. Loves? That chain is not a metaphor. Every step in it is documented, tested, verified, and still being refined. And the chain itself, the sheer improbability of it, the fact that you are here at all, that there is something rather than nothing, that the something that exists has the precise properties necessary for complexity to emerge, the precise values of the fundamental constants that allow atoms to form, stars to ignite, carbon to exist, life to arise. That precise calibration is the thing that makes thoughtful people, including many physicists who are not religious in any traditional sense, say there is something here that demands explanation. And Feynman would agree that it demands explanation. He would disagree that God is necessarily the explanation, not because he was certain God does not exist, but because invoking God as an explanation for the fine-tuning of the constants, for the origin of the universe, for the existence of consciousness, is in his view not actually explaining anything. It is giving a name to a mystery without reducing the mystery at all. If you say God created the universe with these precise constants, you have simply pushed the question back one step. Who created God? What are God's properties? How does God interact with matter? Where is the evidence that this entity exists independently of the desire for it to exist? These are not hostile questions. They are the only honest questions available. Pues this is the move that Feynman made over and over. In physics, in biology, in philosophy, in everything. He refused to accept a label as a substitute for understanding. He wanted to know the mechanism. He wanted to know how, not just what. And the great honest answer that science has arrived at, after centuries of asking how, is that the universe operates according to laws that are mathematical, that are precise, that are the same everywhere we have looked, and that do not appear to require a lawgiver in any sense we can verify. The laws are not commands. They are descriptions. They describe what happens. And what happens is so consistently, so reliably, so beautifully structured that the laws themselves feel almost inevitable, almost necessary, and yet we do not know why the laws are what they are. We do not know why there is a universe at all. We do not know why there is something rather than nothing. And that final darkness at the bottom of the question is where Feynman lived. Not in the darkness itself, but at its edge, with his face turned toward it, curious and unafraid and completely honest about the fact that he could not see through it. Now, I want to do something that Feynman himself did, which is to bring this down to the level of a person, because all of this, the constants, the quantum fields, the fine-tuning, the origin of the universe, it can feel very far from the actual lived experience of asking whether God exists. And the lived experience is not nothing. The lived experience is, in fact, the most immediate data you have. Here's what I mean. People have experiences that they describe as religious, as transcendent, as encounters with something larger than themselves, something that feels personal and real and undeniable. These experiences are not rare. They are reported across every culture, every era, every level of education. Mystics and physicists, farmers and philosophers, children and elderly people lying in hospital beds. Something happens in consciousness that feels like contact, like being seen, like a warmth that is not meteorological. Feynman did not dismiss these experiences. He had his own version of them, standing at a chalkboard when the mathematics suddenly resolved, when the equations that had been a tangled mess suddenly showed their underlying symmetry, and he felt something that he described as almost physical, a rush, a recognition, a sense of rightness that he could not entirely account for. He did not call that God, but he did not call it nothing. What he called it was wonder, and he thought wonder was the most important cognitive state available to a human being. Not because it was comfortable. Wonder is often not comfortable, but because it was honest, because it accurately reflected the relationship between a finite mind and an infinite cosmos, because it kept you from the most dangerous intellectual error, which is not uncertainty. The most dangerous intellectual error, which premature certainty. The conviction that you already know the answer, that the question is settled, that you can stop looking. That error kills curiosity, and killed curiosity, Feynman thought, was one of the saddest things that could happen to a person. He said, and this is very close to his actual words, that it is a terrible thing when the beauty and the mystery of the world are smothered by people who are absolutely sure they know what is going on. On both sides, the person who is absolutely sure God exists and has arranged the universe for human purposes, and the person who is absolutely sure God does not exist and that the universe is merely mechanical. Both of them, in Feynman's view, have made the same mistake. They have closed their eyes to the actual strangeness of things. They have chosen the comfort of resolution over the vitality of the open question. And here, right here, is where I want to give you something practical, something you can take away from this and use. Because in a moment, I'm going to walk you through the specific intellectual posture that Feynman modeled, the actual method he used when confronted with questions that could not be answered with current knowledge. And it is a method that will not just change how you think about God. It will change how you think about everything. But first, let me give you one more piece of the picture, because without it, the method will not make full sense. The question of God is not just a question about cosmology. It is a question about meaning, and meaning is not the same as mechanism. This is a distinction that Feynman made carefully, and that many people in the science versus religion debate miss entirely. Science is extraordinarily good at describing mechanisms, how things work, what causes what, the chain of physical events that connects the Big Bang to you sitting here right now. Science is not designed to tell you whether any of it means anything, whether it matters, whether there's a reason you should care about anything at all. These are not scientific questions in the technical sense. They are philosophical questions, and Feynman was honest enough to say so. He was also honest enough to say that he personally found more than enough meaning in the scientific picture. That knowing you are made of atoms that were forged in dying stars, that your consciousness is an emergent property of matter organized in an extraordinary specific way, that the universe has been running for 13.8 billion years and has produced, as one of its results, you a being capable of knowing all of this, was for him not a reason for despair, but a reason for something close to reverence. Not reverence toward a person, reverence toward the process, toward the sheer improbable fact of existence. He thought that this kind of reverence was not less than religious experience. He thought it might be more. But he would not tell you that you had to feel the same way. He would not tell you that finding meaning in the scientific picture was the only legitimate response. He would tell you that you had to be honest, that you had to look at the actual evidence, all of it, including the evidence of your own experience, and that you had to resist the temptation to decide in advance what you were going to find. Fíjate bien, this is the core of what he called scientific thinking, and it is simpler than people usually expect. It is the practice of holding a hypothesis, your best current guess, your provisional answer, with exactly the right amount of grip. Not so loosely that you abandon it at the first difficulty. Not so tightly that you cannot update it when new evidence arrives. The right amount of grip, which means being genuinely willing, genuinely open to being wrong, not performing willingness to be wrong, the way people sometimes do when they want to seem intellectually humble while actually being completely certain. Actually willing, actually ready to say, I thought I knew and I was mistaken, and that is not a defeat. That is how this works. Now, let me be specific, because Feynman was always specific, and specificity is what separates real thinking from the performance of real thinking. When it comes to the existence of God, the honest intellectual position, the one that the evidence actually supports, is not atheism and it is not theism. It is what philosophers call agnosticism, but a very particular kind of agnosticism, one that is not passive, not a shrug, not a refusal to engage. It is an active engagement with uncertainty. It is saying, I do not know whether there is a mind behind the universe, and I take that not knowing seriously. I do not resolve it by defaulting to the answer that feels more comfortable. or the answer that my culture gave me, or the answer that makes me feel less alone in the dark? I hold it as an open question, and I let it continue to generate new questions, new observations, new ways of looking. And here's the thing about that posture, the thing that Feynman embodied more completely than almost anyone. Holding the question open is not the same as being paralyzed by it. You can live fully, with great joy, with great purpose, with great love for the people around you, and for the extraordinary fact of being alive, while also holding the biggest questions open. In fact, Feynman thought that holding the questions open was the condition of living fully, that the alternative, closing the question, deciding, settling into certainty on either side, was a kind of death. A death of curiosity, a dimming of the light that makes human consciousness interesting. He used to play bongo drums, did you know that? He used to go to strip clubs in Pasadena and do his physics calculations on paper napkins, which horrified some of his colleagues and delighted others. He used to pick locks, literally, because he found the mechanisms fascinating. He was a sassafras during the Manhattan Project. Not because he needed to be, but because the puzzle interested him. He learned to draw late in life because someone challenged him and he found he loved it. He learned Portuguese because he was going to give lectures in Brazil and he did not want to give them in translation. He lived, in other words, as if the world were inexhaustibly interesting. As if every surface, every problem, every question had more inside it than you could reach in a lifetime. And the question of God for him was no different. It was not a question to be dismissed. It was not a question to be quickly answered. It was a question to be lived with, turned over, examined from every angle, treated with the same rigorous curiosity he brought to quantum electrodynamics or the wobble of a spinning plate. Because here's the thing about questions that cannot be answered with current knowledge. They are not empty. They are full. They are the most full things that exist. The history of science is a history of questions that people thought were permanently unanswerable, turning out with new tools and new frameworks to yield extraordinary answers. 100 years ago, the origin of the universe was considered a metaphysical question, not a scientific one. Then we discovered the expansion of the universe. Then the cosmic microwave background radiation. Then the mathematics of the early universe, and suddenly the question of where the universe came from became a question that science could at least partially address. We do not have the full answer. We may not have it for a very long time, but the question moved from the realm of pure speculation into the realm of evidence-based inquiry. And there is no reason, Feynman would say, to assume that other currently unanswerable questions will not make the same journey, including the question of consciousness, including the question of why the laws of physics are what they are, including the question of whether the universe, at some level of description we have not yet reached, exhibits something that might meaningfully be called intention. These are not questions that science has answered. They are questions that science is circling, getting closer to, developing better tools to approach. And the honest thing to do is to wait, to watch, to keep looking, not to declare victory for either side while the investigation is ongoing. Meter, there is a concept in physics called the anthropic principle, and it comes in two versions, a weak version and a strong version. And both of them are relevant here. The weak version says simply, we observe the universe to have the properties necessary for our existence, because if it did not have those properties, we would not be here to observe it. This is logically airtight and also somewhat unsatisfying because it is not really an explanation. It is a tautology dressed up in technical language. The strong version says something more interesting. The universe must have the properties necessary for observers to emerge. Must, not as a coincidence, not as one of many possible outcomes, as a necessity. And the strong version, if it is true, has enormous implications. It suggests that the existence of observers, of conscious beings who can ask these questions, is not an accident. It is, in some sense, what the universe was for. Now, Feynman was cautious about the strong anthropic principle. He was cautious about anything that smelled like teleology, like purpose baked into the structure of things, because teleology is very easy to mistake for explanation when it is actually just a restatement of the mystery. But he was not dismissive. He was curious. He thought the fine tuning of the constants, the precisive values of the electron mass, the strength of gravity, the cosmological constant, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravity, all of which are balanced with extraordinary precision in ways that allow complexity and life to exist, was a genuine puzzle, not a puzzle that required God as its solution, but a puzzle that required a solution that demanded one. And the current best candidates, the multiverse hypothesis, the possibility that our universe is one of an enormous or infinite number of universes, each with different physical constants, and we happen to live in one that permits our existence, are not fully satisfying either. They solve the fine-tuning problem by making the problem bigger. If there are infinitely many universes, then of course some of them will have the right constants for life. But then you have to explain where the multiverse came from, and the turtles go all the way down. This is the edge. This is where Feynman lived, and this is where he invited you if you're willing to live too. Not in the answer, in the question. In the full, honest, uncomfortable, exhilarating not knowing. ¿Tiene sentido? Good, because now I want to give you the thing I promised. The specific method, the tool. It is called epistemic humility, and it is not a complicated concept, but it is extraordinarily difficult to practice consistently because it cuts against some very deep human instincts. Epistemic humility means knowing the limits of what you know. Not just saying, I might be wrong, but actually tracking, with care and precision, which of your beliefs are well supported by evidence, which are plausible but uncertain, which are speculative, and which are things you believe because you want them to be true. This is not about being passive. It is not about refusing to take positions. It is about taking the right kind of position, one that is proportional to the evidence, one that has room in it for revision. A pride to the question of God, epistemic humility means this. If you are a believer, you hold your belief with the awareness that it is a belief, not a demonstrated fact, and you remain genuinely open to the possibility that the universe is different from what you have assumed. And if you are a non-believer, you hold your non-belief with the same awareness. You do not treat the absence of evidence as the evidence of absence, as if the silence of the cosmos were a verdict rather than a condition of current knowledge. You stay curious, you stay honest. You resist the temptation, which is always there, always warm and comfortable, of deceiving you already know. Feynman modeled this every day of his scientific life. He changed his mind when the evidence required it. He was wrong about things, and he said so clearly and without embarrassment. He thought that being wrong and knowing it was a form of intelligence. That the willingness to update was not a weakness, but the engine of progress, in science and in life. And he thought that this habit of mind, this willingness to be wrong, this comfort with uncertainty, this love of the open question, was in its own way a kind of spiritual practice. Not in any conventional religious sense, but in the sense that it required you to let go of ego, to prioritize truth over comfort, to be more interested in what is actually there than in what you would like to be there, to sit night after night on your metaphorical porch, looking up at the light that left its source 2.5 million years ago, and to feel not the closure of a question answered, but the opening of a question that grows more interesting the longer you hold it. Imagínate por un momento. You are standing in a field and the sky above you is completely clear, and it is the kind of dark that you only find far from cities, the kind of dark where the Milky Way is not a vague suggestion, but a river, a white river of ancient light crossing the entire sky from horizon to horizon. And you know, because you have taken the time to learn, that you are looking at the disk of our galaxy Edge-on, that the bright core at the center is a region of extraordinary density containing a black hole 4 million times the mass of our sun, that the light from the farthest stars you can see has been traveling for tens of thousands of years, that in this moment, scattered through that river of light, there are almost certainly planets, and almost certainly, though we cannot yet confirm it, organisms of some kind, creatures that exist under conditions we would find lethal or conditions we would find familiar, doing whatever it is that life does, metabolizing, reproducing, responding to their environment, perhaps somewhere in that river, thinking. And you stand there, in the dark, in the field, and you feel something, and whatever that feeling is, whatever word you reach for, wonder, reverence, terror, gratitude, loneliness, joy, that feeling is real. It is data. It is your nervous system responding to the actual nature of the universe. And Feynman would say, do not explain it away. Do not rush to name it. Do not immediately translate it into the language of your existing beliefs. Just feel it. Let it be what it is. Because in that moment, in that honest, unmediated encounter with the scale of things, You are doing something that very few creatures in the known universe can do. You are knowing where you are. Not your address, not your city, but your actual place in the cosmos. A warm, breathing, thinking thing on a rock in the middle of an incomprehensible immensity, capable of being moved by that immensity, capable of asking whether it means anything, capable of not knowing, and choosing in the face of that not knowing to remain curious. That Feynman thought was enough. That was more than enough. That was in fact extraordinary because the universe has been running for 13.8 billion years, and in all that time, in all that space, it has produced, as far as we know, only here, only on this small rock orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable galaxy, something that can know it, something that can look back at it, something that can ask the question. And maybe he would say, with that particular smile of his, the one that suggested he was about to say something that sounded simple and was actually enormous. Maybe the question itself is the answer, not in a mystical sense, in a very literal one. The fact that the universe generated a being capable of asking whether it was designed is, at minimum, one of the most interesting things that has ever happened. And whether there is a God behind it or not, whether the process was intended or accidental or something for which we do not yet have a word, the fact remains that you are here, asking the question in a cosmos that did not have to permit you to exist. And that does not owe you an answer. And that is, in every direction you look, stranger and more beautiful than anything you could have invented. Pues go look at the stars tonight, not to find God, not to confirm or deny anything, just to look, to let the scale of it land, to feel the particular vertigo of knowing where you are, and to notice as you stand there in the dark that the feeling that rises in you, that specific mixture of smallness and wonder, and something that is almost love directed at nothing in particular. That feeling has a nay, even if the thing it is pointing at does not. Feynman called it the pleasure of finding things out, and he spent his whole life chasing it. Not because it brought him certainty, because it brought him every single time deeper into the mystery. And the mystery, he always said, is where the interesting things lie. So the next time someone asks you whether God exists, you do not have to give them the answer you were handed. You can give them something better. You can give them the honest shape of the question. You can tell them that the universe is 13.8 billion years old and 93 billion light years wide and made mostly of things we cannot see. And that within it, on a small rock orbiting an ordinary star, something emerged that can ask whether any of it was intended, and that the answer to that question is genuinely, beautifully, terrifyingly unknown, and that the unknown is not a failure. It is an invitation, the most open invitation that has ever been issued to any mind anywhere in the cosmos. Feynman accepted that invitation every day of his life, and the door for you is still open.